A billionaire, a deaf mother, a frustrated community, and a 10-year-old who became the only voice that mattered. Graham Ellington never expected the room to turn silent the moment his mother lifted her hands to speak. But that's exactly what happened inside the Midtown Arts Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on a warm Saturday afternoon packed with tension. This wasn't some fancy gala or tech conference. It was a community investment meeting with dozens of residents, city planners, local entrepreneurs, and neighborhood leaders, all anxious to hear what the billionaire was planning to do in their area. But before Graham could even begin, his mother, Marjorie Ellington, tapped his elbow and motioned that she wanted to make the opening remarks herself. That's when everything shifted. At first, people smiled politely, some even clapped. But the moment Marjorie began signing, fast, sharp, confident, the applause faded, replaced by confused glances bouncing across the room. You could almost feel a wave of embarrassment rolling from row to row, the kind that makes people shift in their seats and pretend to understand what's happening. Graham cleared his throat, trying to bridge the awkward moment. "She's saying, 'Thank you all for being here,'" he explained, but Marjorie tapped the table twice, signaling him to stop. She wanted to speak for herself. A few people admired the confidence in her expression. Others whispered to their neighbors, trying to guess what she was saying. And then there were those who stared at her hands, as if they were watching a foreign movie without subtitles. One man near the front leaned toward his friend and muttered, "So nobody here knows how to follow that?" Another woman sat stiff in her chair, clutching a notepad she clearly wasn't going to write anything on. Graham tried again, gently. "Mom, maybe let me?" She shook her head firmly. Even without hearing her voice, everyone could sense her determination. Her signs were strong, precise, filled with purpose. She wanted them to hear her ideas directly, without Graham filtering anything. She'd spent weeks preparing for this meeting, studying proposals, reviewing neighborhood concerns, and shaping her own thoughts about how to protect families from being pushed out by rising property prices. She had every right to speak, but the room didn't know what to do with her, and that made Graham's chest tighten with a frustration he hadn't felt in years. His mother wasn't helpless, she wasn't fragile, she wasn't confused. She was brilliant, she was observant, and she had more life experience than half the people in that room combined. Yet here she was, signing with all the clarity in the world, and people were acting like she was speaking in code. Someone coughed, chairs squeaked, a few cell phones appeared under the table as people looked down, pretending to check messages so they wouldn't have to meet her gaze. Graham clenched his jaw and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said tightly, "I'll translate what I can." "She's saying," but Marjorie caught his wrist. She looked him directly in the eyes, her expression both gentle and unyielding. She wanted him to understand that she didn't bring him here to be her voice. She brought him here because she trusted him to give this community something worth fighting for. But she planned to speak for herself in the process. Behind them, someone whispered, "This is uncomfortable." Another voice answered, "Shouldn't they have brought someone to translate? This is, I don't know, man, awkward." Graham felt heat rising behind his ears. Awkward? Was that really what they thought this was? His mother was trying to include them, not embarrass them. She believed they deserved transparency straight from her, not filtered through anyone else. And yet, despite all her confidence, despite all her preparation, the room was slipping away from her. Graham exhaled slowly, trying to figure out how to pull the moment back together. But the next few seconds would push the tension even further in a way neither of them could have predicted. Graham had been in tight situations before, board meetings where investors argued over numbers no one could agree on, live interviews where journalists twisted every answer into a headline, even congressional hearings where nothing he said seemed to satisfy anybody. But none of that compared to the pressure brewing inside this room with his mother standing beside him. He could feel it in the way people leaned back, as if distance would somehow make the situation less uncomfortable. The energy wasn't hostile, just tense. People wanted clarity. They wanted to know what was going on. And Graham, standing at the center of it all, could feel dozens of eyes burning into him, waiting for him to fix the moment. He took a slow breath and whispered to his mother, "They don't understand you. Let me help." Marjorie's fingers moved quickly, sharp enough to show she wasn't backing down. "I prepared for this," she signed. "I have the right to speak." "You do," he replied softly, "but they need someone who—" She cut him off with a look that said she wasn't interested in compromise, not yet. And though he respected her more than anyone in the world, he felt his stomach knotting. This meeting wasn't supposed to start with confusion. They planned to present new ideas to expand small businesses, create training programs for teens, and protect homeowners who felt vulnerable. Marjorie had given brilliant input during the planning. She'd been up late with him for nights, reading, analyzing, comparing. Her insights mattered, but right now, none of that was landing. A woman in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. "Excuse me, is she saying something important? Should we wait, or—" Before Graham could answer, an older man with a baseball cap crossed his arms and groaned. "I thought this was going to be straight information. Why didn't your team prepare for this? You knew she was coming." That one stung, not because he meant harm, but because he was right. Graham should have arranged for an interpreter. He simply underestimated the situation. He assumed he'd translate the important parts and let his mother add details when needed. He assumed the room would have patience. He assumed everyone would at least try. But assumptions don't carry much weight when a room full of people is growing restless by the minute. Marjorie, unfazed, stepped forward and signed even more firmly. Her expression carried a message no one needed to translate. She wasn't embarrassed, and she wasn't backing down. She wanted to speak, she needed to speak. Graham could feel himself getting frustrated. Not with her, never with her, but with the situation, with himself, with the audience, with the entire weight of expectation pressing against him. He tried again. "She's saying—" Marjorie touched his forearm and shook her head. Her message was simple: "Trust me." He pressed his lips together, torn between honoring her independence and preventing the meeting from spiraling into confusion. He looked toward the crowd, hoping someone would surprise him. Maybe someone knew sign language. Maybe someone would raise their hand and say they understood. But no one did.
A man in the middle row muttered under his breath, "Can we just start the presentation already?" Another leaned toward a friend and whispered, "I feel kind of bad, but what are we supposed to do here?" Graham rubbed the bridge of his nose. The tension was thick enough to feel in the air. His mother, though calm, wasn't blind to it. She scanned the room, her eyes softening for just a moment when she caught sight of a woman shaking her head in frustration. Marjorie paused her signing. Then she tried something different. She slowed her movements, exaggerated certain gestures, even pointed to her binder as she signed, trying to help the room follow along. She wasn't giving up, not even close. Graham felt a flicker of pride watching her adapt, watching her fight to be heard. She'd always been like this, strong, focused, unwilling to disappear into the background just because something was complicated. But even with all that effort, the confusion inside the room didn't lift. People squinted, tilted their heads, tried to guess, but guessing wasn't understanding, and Graham knew something had to give soon. But before he could decide how to intervene, someone in the back of the room stood up, shifting the entire direction of the moment in a way no one expected. The person who stood up wasn't who anyone expected, not a councilman, not a business owner, not one of the organizers trying to smooth things over. It was a boy, small, thin, wearing a simple blue t-shirt and a pair of jeans that looked one size too big. He couldn't have been more than 10. He walked out from behind the refreshment table where his mother had been arranging trays of sandwiches and bottled water. She reached for his arm instinctively, whispering something, probably telling him to sit down, but he gently pulled away. Graham blinked, unsure if he was imagining things. The boy stepped closer, raising one hand, not in fear, but in confidence. I can help," the boy said, his voice carrying just enough strength to cut through the murmurs. People turned in their seats, eyebrows raised. A few looked relieved just to have something break the tension. One man laughed under his breath, clearly thinking the kid was joking. But the boy wasn't joking. He walked right up to the front, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, stopping next to Marjorie like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What's your name, buddy?" Graham asked, trying to sound calm even though the moment felt unusual and unexpected. "Jalen," the boy answered, keeping his eyes on Marjorie. He added a last name quietly, as if unsure whether he should take up more space than he already had. Marjorie watched him with a curious expression. She wasn't annoyed by the interruption. If anything, she looked hopeful and surprised. Jalen pointed to his own chest and said, "I know what she's saying." That set off a whole new wave of reactions. A woman in the front row nearly dropped her notebook. Someone whispered, "Wait, seriously?" Another person leaned forward, elbows on knees, suddenly invested. Graham tried to hide his shock. You understand sign language?" Jalen nodded. "My cousin can't hear. I learned to talk with him." His voice had a slight tremble, not from fear, but from the pressure of everyone staring at him. Still, he didn't back away. He didn't stammer, he didn't shrink. He just waited to see if Marjorie wanted his help. She looked at the boy for a long second, then raised her hand slowly and began signing again, this time at a steady, natural pace. She trusted him immediately, something she didn't do often, something Graham noticed right away. Jalen nodded while she signed, his expression focused, respectful. Then he said clearly, "She says, 'Thank you for being patient,' and she wants to talk about protecting families who've lived here a long time." The entire room went silent, but for the first time that day, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was relief, it was clarity, it was the sound of people finally understanding what they'd struggled with only moments before. Marjorie signed again. Jalen followed. She says she's been reading everything about what's happening in this neighborhood, and she's worried that the people who built this place won't be able to stay. Someone near the back whispered, "That's what we've been saying for months." Another nodded slowly, now hanging on every word. Jalen kept translating, his rhythm smooth and natural. He didn't just say the words, he matched her tone. When she was serious, he sounded serious. When she made a small joke, something about how Graham still couldn't fold a fitted sheet even as an adult, the boy's mouth curved into a grin as he translated it. The room actually laughed. Genuine laughter, not the nervous kind from before. Graham felt tension slip off his shoulders, replaced with something he hadn't expected that day. Admiration for a child he'd never met before. Someone raised a hand. Can we ask her questions?" Jalen looked to Marjorie, who smiled warmly and signed her approval. The energy in the room completely changed, and the woman who had earlier clutched her notepad with confusion now leaned forward, pen ready, eager to listen. Jalen didn't look away from Marjorie. He didn't look intimidated by the crowd. He simply stepped into the space like he belonged there, and in that moment, it was clear that he did. But things were only beginning to change, because what happened next would take the room from curiosity to something far deeper. With Jalen now standing beside her, Marjorie seemed to regain every ounce of confidence she'd walked in with. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes brightened, and her hands moved with the kind of rhythm that showed she was finally being heard, truly heard. She signed something longer this time, her expressions shifting between concern, hope, and a hint of frustration. Jalen followed each movement carefully. "She says," he began, "that she knows people are scared, not just about the new buildings or the prices going up. She says people feel like they're losing their place, like they won't belong here anymore." A hush fell over the room. Marjorie signed again. "And she thinks it's unfair that families who held this neighborhood together might get pushed out," Jalen continued. "She wants any new project to protect them first." Someone in the middle row leaned back and whispered, "Finally, somebody gets it." Another person added, "That's exactly what we've been trying to tell the city." Marjorie paused, noticing the shift in energy. She wasn't naive. She knew she'd walked into a room full of mixed emotions. Some people were excited about investment, others feared they'd lose their homes. People weren't just confused earlier, many were angry, some even suspicious. And now that they understood her words, she could sense a different kind of tension rising. Not confusion anymore, but raw emotion. A man near the aisle stood up. "Ask her this," he said, pointing gently toward Jalen.
Does she know how many families are already getting letters telling them their rent is going up?
Jalen glanced at Marjorie. She signed quickly.
She says yes, he translated. She's read all the reports, and she says if she had her way, no one would get pushed out because of someone else's profit.
The room murmured again, but it wasn't frustration anymore. It was agreement, relief, connection. But when Marjorie continued, the room tensed once more. She signed with sharper, faster movements. Jalen hesitated for just a second, then spoke clearly. She says some people in this room think she shouldn't be here. She says she can tell when people look at her like she doesn't fit. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some people looked down, others shifted in their seats, and a few stared at her with wide eyes, not expecting her to address something so direct. Marjorie wasn't attacking anyone. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't pretending either. She was honest, transparent, and her honesty made the room uncomfortable again, but in a new way, the kind that forces people to reflect. A woman near the front cleared her throat. That's not what we meant," she said gently. "We just didn't know what to do." Jalen translated that back to Marjorie. She nodded softly, then signed something that made his eyes widen just a little. "She says she understands," Jalen said quietly, "but she also says that sometimes people don't mean harm and still end up hurting someone. She says she's used to it, but she wishes it didn't have to be this way." You could hear the weight of her words in every breath the room took afterward. Graham watched all of this unfold with a complicated mix of pride and heartbreak. He'd grown up seeing his mother face situations like this, people misunderstanding her, underestimating her, or talking around her like she wasn't present. He thought this meeting would be different. He wanted it to be different. And now, thanks to a 10-year-old kid, it was becoming different, but not without confronting some hard truths first. A man in the back raised his hand slowly. "Ask her what she thinks we should do," he said. "Not the city, not the developers, us, the people who live here." Marjorie lifted her hands again, her expression soft but firm. And as she began signing, the entire room leaned in, truly leaned in, ready to hear every word. But they had no idea that what she said next would not only answer their question, but move someone in the room to tears. Marjorie signed for several seconds before Jalen began speaking, almost as if he needed a moment to absorb the full weight of her message. When he finally opened his mouth, his voice held a quiet strength none of them expected from someone his age. "She says the first thing you all should do is stop thinking you're fighting alone," he translated. "She says every neighborhood that's ever survived changes did it because people worked together, not apart." A woman near the aisle took off her glasses and wiped her eyes discreetly. The room wasn't just listening, they were feeling every word. Marjorie continued, her hands moving with purpose. "She says you shouldn't wait until the last minute to speak up. She says people deserve to know what's happening to their homes before it's too late." Someone whispered, "Exactly." Another nodded slowly, absorbing every piece of it. Then Marjorie paused, her eyes softened. She lifted her hands again, slower this time, more deliberate. Even without knowing sign language, people could sense this part meant something deeply personal. Jalen hesitated again before translating. "She says," he swallowed softly, "she says she knows what it feels like to be ignored. She says she spent years trying to speak and being treated like her voice didn't matter." The room went still. No coughs, no whispers, not even the shifting of chairs, just silence. Jalen continued, his tone dropping slightly. "She says she doesn't want anyone else to feel that way, not because of money or power or who they are." Graham felt a tightness in his throat. He had heard his mother talk about her frustrations before, the lonely moments when people spoke over her or around her, but hearing a child translated made it hit harder. A man in the back, the same one who'd complained earlier, stood up again. This time his voice wasn't irritated, it was heavy. "Ask her," he said, clearing his throat. "Ask her what she wants us to do when the letters start coming in, once they decide who gets to stay and who doesn't." Jalen turned to Marjorie. She didn't need time to think, the answer was already in her hands. "She says," Jalen reported, "she wants everyone here to form a group, not just to talk, but to plan. She says you need to meet regularly, share information, and support each other before decisions are made for you." He looked back at her as she signed again. "She says she'll help, and Graham will help, but she needs everyone to speak up at the same time." The room buzzed softly, not with frustration or confusion, but with agreement. People looked at each other, nodding, murmuring things like, "She's right," and "We should have done that already." Jalen and Marjorie had done what no one else could that day. They united a room that walked in divided. But another shift was coming. As Marjorie finished signing, someone raised their hand slowly, a teenage girl near the side wall, maybe 14 or 15, wearing a hoodie and holding a sketchbook in her lap. "Can I?" she said, voice trembling. "Can I ask her something?" Jalen nodded gently. "You can ask anything." The girl looked down at her sketchbook for a moment before lifting her eyes again. "Can you ask her if she ever got tired of explaining herself to people who didn't listen?" A few people inhaled quietly, taken off guard by the rawness of the question. Jalen turned to Marjorie. She watched the girl closely before lifting her hands to respond. Her movements were calm, almost soothing. Jalen translated softly. "She says yes, many times. She says she cried sometimes because people treated her like she didn't matter, but she also says she kept going anyway." The girl pressed her lips together, trying to stay strong. "Why?" she asked. "Why keep trying?" Marjorie signed again, slower than before. Jalen's voice wavered slightly as he said, "She says, because when one person understands you, it makes everything worth it." A quiet sniffle came from somewhere near the back, then another closer to the front. Graham looked around the room and realized the meeting had shifted from a discussion about budgets and buildings to something far more meaningful, a conversation about being seen, heard, and valued. And it wasn't because of him, it was because of Jalen. A 10-year-old boy had opened the door to something powerful, but the moment that followed, the one no one expected, would reveal just how deeply this experience was affecting him too. Jalen had been translating for nearly 20 minutes, and he hadn't complained once. But as Marjorie continued signing, something about his posture shifted. He wasn't trembling or scared. It was something deeper, almost like her words were stirring something inside him. Marjorie paused mid-sentence and looked at him closely. She wasn't just communicating, she was reading him, noticing the tiny changes in his expression. She signed something short and gentle. Jalen shook his head, almost embarrassed, but translated anyway. "She says, she wants to know if I'm okay." The room softened at once. He took a breath, then added, "I'm okay, I didn't know this would feel like this." Graham stepped toward him, lowering his voice. "Feel like what?" Jalen shifted his weight, eyes darting between Graham and Marjorie. "Like, I'm talking for somebody who's been through what my cousin goes through, and I didn't think it would hit me like this." People watched with quiet attention, the kind you only give when someone is speaking from a place they don't usually share publicly. Marjorie signed slowly, her hands tender, grounding. Jalen wiped his palm against his jeans and translated. "She says she understands. She says sometimes helping someone else makes you feel things you forgot you were carrying." A few people nodded, relating instantly. Then Marjorie continued signing, but this time Jalen didn't speak. He just watched her hands carefully, blinking a few times. Graham stepped closer. "Jalen, what's she saying?" The boy swallowed hard. "She's asking me something." "What?" Jalen hesitated, then answered. "She's asking if anybody ever made me feel small, like I didn't belong somewhere." The air thinned. No one spoke. Jalen didn't immediately answer. His eyes drifted to his mother across the room. She stood silently behind the table, her hands pressed flat against her apron, watching her son with an expression that mixed pride and worry. He turned back to Marjorie. "She says," he murmured, "that it's okay if I don't want to answer." But Jalen lifted his chin a little higher. "I want to," he said. The room leaned in. "It happens at school," he admitted. "Some kids say stuff because my cousin can't hear. They say he's slow or weird, or that I'm weird for learning how to talk with my hands." He paused, pressing his lips together. "They say people like him shouldn't be in the same classes." Someone whispered a soft, pained, "Oh no," under their breath. Jalen kept going. "I always try to defend him, but sometimes they don't listen to me either." Silence draped over the room like a heavy blanket. People shifted, not from discomfort, but from realization. This boy wasn't just translating, he was connecting, he was reliving, he was revealing why he stood up in the first place. Marjorie placed a hand over her heart and signed something slow, meaningful. Jalen's eyes glistened as he translated. "She says she's sorry, and she wishes people didn't treat you or your cousin that way. She says people forget how much words can hurt." A woman near the front quietly covered her mouth. Jalen added, voice quieter now, "She says you're brave, and she says she's grateful you helped her today." He looked up at Marjorie again, and in that moment, the connection between them felt older than the hour they'd known each other. Two people from different generations, different stories, but somehow understanding each other better than most people in their own lives. Graham took a breath, letting the emotions settle, but he could see something transforming in the room, a gentleness replacing the earlier tension. One man broke the silence. "Jalen," he said softly, "thank you, really." Others murmured the same. Jalen's cheeks flushed, the praise making him shy for the first time all afternoon. But Marjorie wasn't finished. She lifted her hands again, her movement slower, wrapping the moment in warmth. Jalen cleared his throat. "She says the only way things get better is when someone speaks up sooner than expected." His voice steadied. "And she says, that's what I did today." A quiet wave of emotion rolled through the crowd, the kind that hits in the chest, not the head. But what happened next, when the meeting turned from emotional to deeply personal, would change the entire direction of the afternoon. The meeting officially ended, but almost no one left right away. People stayed in small groups talking softly, comparing thoughts, trading phone numbers, making promises to meet again. The energy in the room had changed from tense to connected, the kind of atmosphere that feels like something meaningful just took root. But Graham wasn't focused on the crowd. His eyes were on Jalen and Marjorie at the front of the room. Jalen stood next to her, still processing everything that had happened. His mother approached slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, even though they were already clean. She put a hand on Jalen's shoulder. "You all right?" Jalen nodded. "Yeah." "You sure?" He took a second, then nodded again with a bit more confidence. Graham stepped forward, offering Jalen a warm smile. "You did something incredible today," he said. "You helped everyone understand what my mother was trying to say. That's not something most adults could have handled." Jalen looked down, shy again. "I just wanted people to hear her." "And they did," Graham replied, "because of you." Marjorie signed something gently, her eyes soft. Jalen smiled as he translated. "She says thank you and that she's proud of me." His mother exhaled, touched. You could see in her expression that she always believed her son was special, but hearing it said aloud, translated from someone like Marjorie, gave it a whole new weight. A few people approached Marjorie to shake her hand or pat her arm. Others thanked Jalen directly. Even those who initially looked irritated earlier were now offering kind smiles, apologizing for their reactions, trying to repair the tension. One man wearing a plaid shirt approached Jalen with careful steps. "Hey kid," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was the one who said it was awkward earlier. I shouldn't have. You and your mom," he looked at Marjorie and corrected himself. "You and Ms. Marjorie, you both taught me something today." Jalen nodded politely. He didn't need the apology, but he appreciated it. As the man walked away, Graham crouched slightly to get on Jalen's level. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. I know today might have taken a lot out of you, and you didn't have to stand up. Nobody expected you to. Jalen shrugged, but she needed someone. That's true, Graham said, but you also needed something today too. Jalen frowned. What do you mean? He pointed gently toward the space between Jalen and Marjorie. You found someone who sees you, not just as a kid who knows sign language, but someone who understands what you've been carrying. Jalen glanced at Marjorie. She smiled, touched her chest, and signed something short and sweet. Jalen translated, barely above a whisper. She says she's glad she met me. Graham continued. You also showed everyone in this room what real courage looks like. Sometimes bravery doesn't come from being the loudest or the strongest. It comes from stepping in when no one else does. Jalen absorbed the words, quietly.
His mother spoke to Graham, her voice tinged with both gratitude and surprise. I didn't know he would do something like this. I mean, he's always been protective of his cousin, but this, I didn't expect it. Graham nodded. Most people don't expect greatness from kids, but it's there. Sometimes they just need a moment big enough to show it. Jalen looked up at him. Is your mom okay? I mean, did I do it right? Graham let out a soft laugh. Jalen, you didn't just do it right. You did it better than anyone else could have. Marjorie gently took Jalen's hand and squeezed it. She signed to him again, her face full of emotion. Jalen translated, voice steady but warm. She says she hopes I never let anyone make me feel small again. Jalen blinked a few times, surprised at how much that sentence affected him. His mother wrapped her arm around him, pulling him close. The room around them continued buzzing with conversation, but it felt like the three of them were standing in their own quiet circle of connection. Graham stood, looked around, and said, You know, today wasn't supposed to go like this, but honestly, I think it went better than any presentation I could have prepared. Jalen grinned. Maybe your mom should lead all your meetings. Marjorie signed instantly, and Jalen translated. She says she agrees. Everyone laughed, gentle, real, relieved. But the final moment of the afternoon, the one that tied everything together, would leave the entire room thinking long after they walked out the door. Eventually, the crowd began filtering out of the room. People walked slowly, still deep in conversations, not about investment charts or construction plans, but about what they'd felt, what they'd seen, what they'd learned. It wasn't the meeting they expected, but maybe it was the one they needed. Marjorie stood near the front, gathering her notes as Jalen lingered beside her. His mother came over with a mix of pride and disbelief in her expression. You ready to go, baby? She asked. Yeah, he said, although he didn't seem in a hurry. Graham approached them with a thoughtful look on his face. He glanced at Jalen, then at Marjorie, then back at the boy's mom. I know you're busy, he said gently, but would you both mind staying for just a minute? I want to say something before you leave. Jalen's mom nodded, and the three of them stood together at the front while the last of the attendees drifted out the doors. Graham took a breath, choosing his words carefully. I've sat in hundreds of meetings like this. People argue, talk over each other, or leave feeling like they weren't heard. Today, none of that happened, and it wasn't because of me. It wasn't because of the plans we brought. It was because of you, Jalen. The boy blinked, stunned. You didn't just translate, Graham continued. You helped strangers understand each other. You showed everyone what it looks like to step up before someone even thinks to ask. And you reminded this room that people deserve to be heard even when the world doesn't know how to listen. Jalen shifted shyly, rubbing his sleeve. I just didn't want her to stand there alone. Marjorie signed something immediately. Jalen translated, cheeks warming. She says she didn't feel alone, not once I stood up. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. That's who he's always been, she said quietly, even when he was little. Graham nodded, then looked at the boy again. You know what the most powerful thing in this whole room was today?
Jalen shrugged. Your mom. That too, Graham said with a grin. But mostly it was your willingness to help before anyone else did. Jalen didn't reply, but the meaning settled into him. Graham crouched slightly so he could look the boy in the eye. Keep doing that, he said. Keep showing up for people. Keep using what you know, even if it feels small, because it never really is. Jalen held his gaze, and for the first time all day, a spark of pride flickered in his eyes. Marjorie stepped closer and gently squeezed Jalen's arm. Then she signed again, slower than before, like she wanted him to absorb every bit of it. Jalen took a breath and translated softly. She says, "People like us don't always get listened to, but when we speak anyway, when we help anyway, we make things change." His mother wiped at her eyes. Graham exhaled, feeling the truth settle inside the room one last time. A few leftover attendees gathered their things near the back doors. Before leaving, one of them called out, "Hey kid, thanks again. You made today mean something." Jalen waved shyly. Marjorie signed a final message to him, and Jalen translated with a smile breaking across his face. "She says she hopes I remember today for a long time. And," he added, his voice softer, "I think I will." Graham placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder, careful and respectful. "I hope you do, and I hope everyone who walked out of here today remembers it too." The boy nodded. Marjorie gathered her binder. Jalen's mom took her son's hand, and together they started toward the exit. Graham watched them go, feeling something shift inside him. A reminder that no amount of money, influence, or status could ever replace the impact of genuine human connection. Sometimes the biggest change comes from the smallest voice in the room, and sometimes the people we expect the least from end up carrying the most. Jalen paused at the door and looked back one last time, not because he needed anything, but because he understood the weight of what had happened. He lifted his hand, not to wave, but to sign a simple thank you to Marjorie. She smiled, touched her heart, and signed it back. Then the door closed behind them, ending a meeting that no one in that room would ever forget. At the heart of this story lies a simple truth. People deserve to be heard. Everyone. No exceptions. And when we take a moment to listen, truly listen, we open doors that could change someone's life, including our own. You never know who might step forward when you give them the chance. If this story moved you, remember to share it, talk about it, and pass the message forward. And if you want more stories that remind us what we're capable of when we show up for one another, stay tuned. There's so much more to tell.